Have you ever been judged before someone even knew your name? Imagine stepping onto a flight after months of hard work, dressed simply, calm, polite only to have a drink spilled on you by a flight attendant, and then, instead of an apology, you get a look that says you don't belong here. That's exactly what happened to Elias Monroe, a young black CEO flying home from a major business meeting. One mistake, one misunderstanding, and one decision that would change not only his life, but the lives of everyone who witnessed it. Would you stay silent to keep the peace, or would you stand up, knowing it might cost you everything if you've ever faced unfairness? If you've ever swallowed your pride just to move on, this story will feel like looking into a mirror, because sometimes justice isn't about revenge, it's about awakening hearts. Stay with us till the end, because what happens next will restore your faith in humanity. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, so you never miss stories that remind us what it means to be human. Soft background music, a quiet hum of conversation, and then silence. Complete silence. The lobby of the Helios Grand Hotel in downtown Seattle was glowing with golden light. Tall ceilings, marble floors, the faint smell of roasted coffee from the cafe in the corner. Everything about it whispered luxury, until the moment it froze. At the center of that stillness stood you said you have created a complete and wonderful outline. Now you can start writing in Vietnamese the content for the story titled Flight Attendant Spills Drink on Young Black CEO What Happens Next? Shocks Everyone. Complete. Part 1. Note that the character names are consistent in all parts, and note the character names at the end of each part for me and write the standard number of words according to the number of words you have divided in the detailed outline above. The next part is a continuation. Not repeating the content of the previous part. ChatGPT said, "Very good." Below is part 1 of the Vietnamese story, written in a truly touching, slow, cinematic storytelling style, suitable for TTS text-to-speech, with clear rhythm and emotion, about 1,000 words long. This part focuses on the opening scene, where the public humiliation happens, creating a strong emotional pull to keep the listener waiting for part 2. The narration was slow. Soft piano music played in the background. Outside, it was raining lightly in Seattle. The droplets on the glass windows reflected the yellow lights in the lobby of the Helios Grand Hotel, the city's most luxurious hotel. The revolving door spun. A young black man walked in. He wore a light gray jacket, jeans, and worn sneakers with faded toes. He looked casual, but there was something about the way he walked slow, confident, straight-backed that made a few people turn to look, not out of curiosity, but because they weren't used to seeing someone like him around here. The man's name was Elias Monroe, 29 years old, CEO of an educational technology company called NeuroSpark AI. He had just flown in from New York to sign a big contract. He just wanted to rest for a few days before the signing. But as soon as he walked in, he had no idea he was about to become the center of an insult he would remember forever. The sound of high heels echoed lightly on the marble floor. A middle-aged woman approached, her hair tied up, her uniform neat, her eyes cold. She was Clara Hensley, the hotel manager. She stepped forward to block his way, her smile stiff. "Sorry, this area is for guests only. Could you wait outside?" The atmosphere was tense. A few guests turned around. They looked at Elias with half-curious, half-scornful eyes. Elias frowned slightly, his voice low, deep, and calm. "I'm a guest. I made a reservation this morning." Clara raised her eyebrows, still not believing. "You said you booked a room? What class suite? 801. Room 801 is VIP. You must have the wrong hotel." Her voice emphasized the word VIP as an affirmation. "This place is not for you." Elias remained calm. He pulled his room card from his pocket and held it out. It was clearly printed Elias Monroe, Suite 801, Helios, Grand Seattle. Clara paused. She took out her card, looked at it, then turned to the receptionist at the counter. "Jamie, check for me. Is this guy really the guest in room 801? The receptionist, Jamie Rivera, young, Latina, quickly flipped through the list, typing a few lines on the computer. The screen lit up. Jamie looked at Clara, a little confused. "Yes." "Ma'am, he's a VIP guest. Book through Helios executive line." The whole hall was silent. The gazes changed from contempt to embarrassment. Clara tried to keep her face normal, forcing a forced smile. "Oh, there must have been a little misunderstanding. Sorry for the inconvenience." Elias took the card back, his eyes not angry, just cold and distant. "It's okay. I'm used to it," he said softly, but enough for a few people to hear. An elderly customer standing nearby chuckled. He probably just got lost. Jamie looked up at Elias with concern in her eyes. She whispered, "I'm sorry, sir. Let me show you to your room." Elias nodded. As he walked away, Clara tilted her head slightly to look after him. The corners of her lips twitched, her voice small but cold enough these days. Everyone calls themselves an entrepreneur. Elias paused for half a second. He didn't turn around. He just closed his eyes and took a deep breath. His breathing mingled with the sound of the rain outside the window, a long, tired, heavy breath. The elevator opened. He and Jamie stepped inside. Inside. It was just the two of them. The space was small and quiet. The light reflected his face calm but filled. Jamie gathered his courage and said, "Don't take it to heart. Sister Clara, she's difficult with everyone." Elias smiled softly. "She's only hard on people who look like me." The elevator doors closed. The words hung in the air, heavy as a small knife. Jamie bowed his head and said nothing more. Elias, in the dim light, watched the floor numbers jump up. Floor 5, floor 6, floor 7. He gently tightened his grip on the old watch on his wrist, a gift from his mother when he first started out. An invisible reminder echoed in his head. "You will meet many eyes that do not want to see you succeed, but stand tall, son, because you deserve to be anywhere." The elevator doors opened on the 8th floor. Elias stepped out into the thick carpeted hallway, warm lighting, and the scent of wood. He opened the door to his room. Inside was a large suite with windows overlooking Elliott Bay. The city lights reflected on the water. Everything was gorgeous, perfect, but inside, Elias felt empty. He put down his suitcase and sat down on the sofa. He opened his phone and reread the email about the contract he would sign tomorrow morning. The screen reflected his face. His brown eyes were calm, but there was a familiar weariness in them. After a while, he opened his contacts and pressed call. A woman's voice came from the other end of the line, warm and familiar. "Hello?" "Elias, have you arrived safely?" Elias smiled. "Okay, Mom. It's raining in Seattle. I think Dad would love it. Yeah, and remember what Mom said? Yes, I won't let anyone make me feel small." Outside the window, the rain was still falling. The distant lights reflected in his eyes, both bright and sad. He leaned back, whispering under his breath, I'm fine. Mom, it's just, sometimes, the world isn't ready to see someone like me here. The rain answered, steady and quiet, a beautiful scene. But within it was a wave waiting to rise. The morning before Elias arrived in Seattle, the sky over New York was still hazy. He woke early in the small Brooklyn apartment he'd lived in for the 4 years since starting his business. Not the swanky penthouse one might expect of a CEO, but a small nook with walls covered in sticky notes, tech books, and a desk cluttered with sketches. The old watch on his wrist lit up at 6:00 a.m. He opened the window. A cold wind rushed in, carrying the damp smell of last night's rain. Down on the street, the faint sound of cars, the early morning cries of coffee vendors. Elias stood there for a moment, his eyes looking into the distance, as if muttering something only he could hear. On the table, the framed photo of his mother. Grace was still neatly placed. The photo showed her when she was young, wearing a white blouse, smiling gently, the woman who raised her son alone in a poor neighborhood, teaching him about dignity, not with words, but with the way she lived. The phone rang. His mother's voice was clear, a little hoarse with age. "Are you awake?" "Eli, yes." "Mom, I have an early flight today." "I know. Yesterday I read in the newspaper about your subsidiary, NeuroSpark, an AI platform that helps poor students access technology education. I was so proud." Elias smiled softly. "I'm just doing what my mother did, teaching children to believe in their abilities." On the other end of the line, the old mother's laughter rang out, then slowed down and became deeper. "Son, I'm glad you did, but I want you to remember this: the higher you climb, the stronger the wind, and, with skin like yours, you'll have to stand firmer than anyone else." Elias was silent. He knew his mother was right. The way the world saw him, not just as a black businessman, but as an anomaly that needed to be examined. "I know. Mom, I'm used to it." "No, you mustn't. When you get used to injustice, it means you accept it." Those words, soft yet profound, made Elias stand still for a long time. Outside, the early morning sunlight filtered through the window, shining on the photo frame of the mother and son taken together when he graduated from university. He touched the glass and smiled slightly. "Mom, this time, I think things will be different. If this deal is successful, NeuroSpark will be able to open a scholarship fund for the first 200 students. I want to name the fund Grace Program." On the other end of the phone, Mrs. Grace choked slightly. "Thank you, Elias, but you don't have to name me. Just remember, no one is small when they do the right thing." The black car stopped in front of the apartment. The driver opened the door, and Elias stepped out, carrying a small suitcase and a backpack containing his laptop, which he considered his second brain. Before getting in the car, he stopped, looked at the hazy sky above New York, and said softly, "Today, I will make them listen." 4 hours later, he was at a glass high-rise building in Midtown Manhattan. It was the headquarters of Shaw Capital, one of the largest investment groups in the United States. In the conference room on the 46th floor, Mr. Richard Shaw, the group's chairman, was waiting. He was in his 60s, with silver hair, a black suit, a professional smile but cold eyes. Elias entered, brief, polite, but with the air of a man who knew his worth. "Hello, Mr. Shaw. Thank you for your time." Richard did not shake hands immediately. He looked Elias up and down, his voice dry. "You're younger than I thought. People call you the black genius of education online, I want to know if that's a compliment or just a marketing ploy." Elias did not respond. He put the laptop on the table and opened the presentation. His voice was steady, clear, without a trace of trembling. "NeuroSpark is not a miracle. It is simply a bridge to help poor children learn like other children. And with your investment, we can expand the platform nationwide." Richard leaned back in his chair, sipped his espresso, his eyes cold. "Sounds good, but we have a lot of similar startups. The reason I'm still here is because I'm curious. Curious about what, so curious to see if someone like you really has the courage to enter our world." The air in the room froze. The words were soft, but filled with innuendo. Elias still smiled. "I see what you mean, but the world doesn't belong to any one person. It belongs to those who work for something greater than themselves." There was a moment of silence. Richard raised his eyebrows, put down his coffee cup, and then chuckled. "You're confident? Well, you'll get your chance to prove it. See you at the investment conference next week in Seattle." "I will be there," Elias replied, putting away his laptop, shaking his hand. His was warm and firm. Richard's was cold as steel. Their eyes met. A silent challenge had begun. That afternoon, Elias left the building. He walked slowly, blending into the crowd. He was filled with pride, but also with a lingering sense of loneliness. He knew that, whether the deal went through or not, he had something to prove not just to them, but to the world that had always viewed him with suspicion. As the car pulled into JFK, it started to rain again. Heavy drops slid down the windows. He opened his notebook and wrote a short note before turning off his phone and boarding the plane tomorrow. Seattle. A new chapter. No more letting anyone define me. The plane lifted off the ground, through the gray clouds, heading west. Elias leaned his head back in his seat, closing his eyes. Little did he know that 24 hours later, when he stepped into the Helios Grand Hotel, the biggest test of his life would come not from the investment board, but from a woman with a small name tag, Clara Hensley. The storm was coming, and he didn't know it. The next morning, JFK was packed. The loudspeaker announcements echoed through the vast, white-lit space. Elias dragged his suitcase through security. He was used to the scrutiny he received on business trips, but this morning the discomfort was more intense. As he placed his laptop and phone on the tray, the security guard, a blond man, looked at him and said in a half-doubting, half-commanding tone, "What do you do? Does this device contain personal data?" Elias smiled faintly. "I am the founder of a tech company. My data is encrypted. Don't worry." The other person did not reply, only raised his eyebrows slightly. The seemingly harmless answer caused a few people in line behind to whisper. A middle-aged woman whispered to her husband. "The founder doesn't look like it." He heard it clearly, but instead of responding, he just let out a soft sigh. His silence, not out of weakness, was out of weariness with the stereotypes that were so familiar. As the plane began boarding, Elias went to gate 4A, the business class area. He showed his ticket. The ticket inspector looked at his passport, then glanced at him. "Are you sure this is the right ticket?" "Certainly," Elias replied, without changing his tone. After a moment's hesitation, the ticket was scanned, the beep sounded, and the door opened. He stepped through, carrying a mixture of patience and the reminder that today he would just focus on work. Nothing more. Inside the business class cabin, Everything was shiny, the smell of expensive perfume, the clink of glasses, the sound of the electric reclining seats. He chose his seat, row 3A, next to the window. Next to him was a white woman in her 40s, wearing exquisite jewelry, who looked at him and turned away without saying goodbye. Elias put his suitcase on the shelf, sat down, and opened his laptop. On the screen, a slideshow appeared with the words, "Education Without Borders, the Future of Equal Access." He adjusted a few details, his mother's voice still ringing in his head. When the world does not welcome you, greet it with kindness. A moment later, the flight attendant's voice rang out. "Hello, this is Samantha Price, Chief Flight Attendant for Seattle Flight 312. We're delighted to serve you today." Her voice was warm, precise, and professionally rhythmic. But as Samantha reached Elias, her smile faltered. She glanced at the ticket, then at him, her voice quieter. "Are you sure you're in the right seat? Business class is for—" She paused, her words hanging, but her eyes said the rest. Elias nodded slightly. "Yes, I'm here. My ticket says row 3A. The air froze. Samantha smiled wryly. "Of course. Sorry to ask. Have a comfortable flight." She turned away, faster than usual. The woman sitting next to me, whose ticket name was Karen Doyle, chuckled. She was just doing the right thing. These days, many people try their luck by pretending to be business class. Elias did not reply. He opened his notebook and wrote a few short lines. Doubt, the first barrier. As the plane took off, white clouds spread out outside the window. Elias leaned his head back, intending to close his eyes to rest, but the whispering around him did not stop. An elderly couple in the back row whispered just enough for him to hear. "He looks familiar. Is he a rapper? No, probably some influencer who is a CEO and dresses like that." Elias opened his eyes. He wasn't angry. He just felt as heavy as stone. 10 years of work, hundreds of hours of presentations, 1,000 times proven himself, and still some people only saw the color of his skin. Samantha returned, this time serving water. "What would you like?" "Sir, just water." "Thank you." She poured water, her hand shaking slightly. A drop splashed on the edge of the glass, touching his laptop keyboard. Elias immediately took out a towel to wipe it away, smiling. "It's okay." She was confused. "I'm sorry. That was so clumsy." He nodded slightly, not paying attention, but in the front row, Karen glanced back and said to the waiter, "Actually, I think young people should learn to respect luxury spaces. Everything here is expensive." The voice, soft, but like a knife. Samantha was silent. Elias looked out, where the clouds were white as the sea. He sighed softly, remembering the morning before leaving home, the look in his mother's eyes when she said, "Don't get used to injustice." Perhaps she had sensed it before he did, mid-flight. Samantha returned once more, this time with a male flight attendant. They whispered a few words to each other, then the man looked at Elias and nodded. Samantha walked over, her voice polite. "Mr. Monroe, we'd like to double-check your reservation information, just to ensure security procedures." Elias looked at her for a long moment. Security procedures, or classification procedures. Samantha blushed. "No, just a random request from the system. I went through security, checked in, and sat in my correct seat. I don't think the system needs any more randomization." The man beside him coughed softly, as if to dispel the tense atmosphere. "We are just following instructions. Thank you for your cooperation." Elias took out his wallet, handed over his card, and said nothing more. After a few seconds of checking, they returned it. Samantha smiled wryly. "Sorry for the inconvenience. It's okay. I'm used to it." There it was again. But this time, his voice was lower and colder. The plane shook slightly in the wind. The captain's voice came over the loudspeaker. "Hello, this is Captain Miller. We are flying at 35,000 feet. Light rain over Seattle." Inside the cabin, a few passengers began chatting. Samantha walked by and overheard a woman named Karen say to her husband, "If the airline had tighter passenger screening, perhaps unsuitable people wouldn't have been able to get into this cabin." Samantha paused at the words. A strange feeling crept into her heart, a mixture of shame and confusion. She looked back at Elias. He was still sitting there, his eyes fixed on the clouds, his face strangely calm. She wondered, who was that man? And why could he be so calm when the whole world doubted him? 2 hours later, as the plane was about to descend, Elias received an email from Richard Shaw's secretary. The subject line was short, "Tomorrow's meeting, confirmed. Be ready to impress." He smiled faintly and thought to himself, "Impress, I'm used to having to impress. Not with talent, but with existence." He closed his laptop and looked down at the parting clouds. Seattle was in the distance, peeking through the thin mist. Little did he know that this place, the Helios Grand Hotel, would be the stage for the biggest lesson of his life, a lesson in prejudice, justice, and dignity. The plane door opened. A cool, damp Seattle breeze rushed in, carrying the scent of rain and salt. Elias stood, took his suitcase, and nodded to Samantha as she said her final goodbyes. Her voice was quieter and more sincere than before. "Thank you for flying with us. Mr. Monroe, have a nice day." He replied with a slight smile. "Thank you. And don't let this world make you forget that everyone deserves respect." She paused, then nodded slightly. Her blue eyes moistened. Perhaps, in that moment, Samantha understood that his words were not just for her, but for the entire world she lived in. Outside the airport, when the rain was still falling lightly, Elias pulled out his suitcase and called a taxi. The driver, a middle-aged man of Asian origin, opened the door for him, smiling, friendly. "Where to?" "Man, Helios Grand Hotel, downtown." "Wow, that's a fancy hotel. Are you on business a little? And maybe more?" The car rolled through the wet streets. On both sides were rows of red maple trees, hidden in the morning mist. Elias leaned his head back, looking out. Raindrops slid down the glass, reflecting his image, quiet but thoughtful. On the radio, the announcer's voice rang out. "Morning news this week. The National Technology Conference is taking place in Seattle. Many startups are expected to present revolutionary projects." Elias chuckled. Yes, he was one of them, but he knew in his heart that the real test wasn't in the conference. It was how the world saw him before he spoke. When the car pulled up to the Helios Grand Hotel, the rain was still pouring down. The entire glass facade of the building reflected the yellow lights and the people coming in and out. A doorman in a smart uniform rushed to open the car door and held an umbrella for Elias. "Welcome to Helios Grand." He nodded his thanks. That friendly smile put Elias at ease. At least, here, everything seemed to be okay. He entered the lobby. The space was large, the ceiling high, the crystal chandeliers sparkling. The soft sound of a piano echoed from a far corner. The guests were all dressed elegantly, talking and laughing softly. Elias went straight to the reception desk, handing over his papers and credit card. The man behind the counter was Jamie Rivera. She recognized him immediately and smiled warmly. "Hello, Mr. Monroe. We have a room prepared for you. Are you tired from the trip?" His voice was soft and natural. Elias replied, "No, I'm fine. Seattle is much quieter than New York." Jamie laughed. "Yes, it only rains here nonstop." While she was checking in, Clara Hensley, the hotel manager, was inspecting the lobby from a distance. Her eyes fell on Elias, a slight, almost unconscious frown. She approached, her voice even Jamie. "Who is this?" Jamie looked up. "Yes, Mr. Monroe, VIP guest, Suite 801 booked through Helios Executive Line." Clara nodded, but her eyes still held a questioning look. "Oh, I see. Thank you." Then she turned to Elias, giving him a polite smile. "Hello, Mr. Monroe. Welcome to Helios Grand. We hope you will be satisfied with our service." Her voice was perfect, the kind of voice someone trained in hospitality would have, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. Elias knew it instantly, the way one knows when the rain is about to get heavier. He nodded slightly, saying nothing more. Jamie handed over the room key and bowed his head. "Have a wonderful holiday." Elias took the key and walked away, but as soon as he was out of sight, Clara leaned over and whispered to Jamie, "Are you sure is this person really a VIP? It doesn't seem like it." Jamie paused. "I checked. Clara, he's the CEO of NeuroSpark AI, the company invited to the conference this week." Clara was surprised for a moment, then laughed coldly. "A black company. Well, the world sure changes fast these days." Jamie looked at her, surprised and slightly annoyed, but she kept quiet. She knew arguing with her superiors at this point would do no good. Elias went upstairs to his room. It was large and modern, with large windows overlooking Elliott Bay. He put down his suitcase, sat down on the sofa, and turned on his laptop. A string of emails popped up. There was a new message from Richard Shaw. "See you at the conference. Don't be late." He looked at the cold words and smiled slightly. Not a happy smile, but the kind of smile that comes when you know the game you're playing. Shaw, he knew, wanted more than just a presentation. He wanted to see how Elias, a black businessman, would fare in front of these powerful people. The rain intensified in the evening. Elias went down to the ground floor cafe for a snack. He chose a secluded corner near the glass door. A few waiters passed by. Some glanced briefly, then quickly looked away. He was used to that kind of look, both polite and prejudiced. While she was reading the documents, Jamie walked over. She was carrying a cup of coffee, smiling brightly. "I bought you a cup of homemade coffee. Hope you like it." Elias was surprised. "Thank you. No need. I want to apologize on behalf of the manager. Here sometimes, people look without really seeing." He looked at her, his eyes softening. "Thank you, Jamie. But you don't need to apologize to anyone. Just treat everyone with kindness." She bowed her head slightly and walked away. Elias watched, his heart lightening a little. Amidst the cold gazes, just a little bit of goodwill was enough to make people believe in good things. That night, Elias worked late into the night. Outside the window, Seattle was covered in a murky rain. The city lights reflected on the water like 1,000 stars imprisoned in the ocean. He lay back, closed his eyes, and said to himself, "Tomorrow will be fine. Everything will go as planned." But he had no idea that, just a few hours later, as he walked down the hall to breakfast, a small incident, just a spilled glass of orange juice, would change the whole story. Not just his, but the whole story of the people in this building. The next morning, the rain had stopped. The weak sunlight filtered through the curtains, reflecting on the wooden floor. Elias woke up early, adjusting his tie in front of the mirror, his charcoal suit, the old silver watch on his wrist, a gift from his mother when he founded the company, still shone simply. He looked at himself in the mirror, smiled slightly. Looks good. Today is an important day. He packed up his documents and carefully placed them in his briefcase along with his laptop, which contained his entire presentation for the Shaw Capital signing. Everything was perfect. He walked out of the room, feeling light and confident. The hotel lobby was as crowded as yesterday. Laughter, clinking glasses, the smell of coffee filled the air. Elias chose a table by the window and ordered a simple breakfast: fried eggs, toast, and orange juice. Jamie saw him from the counter and hurried over. "Good morning, Mr. Monroe. Did you sleep well?" "Very good, thank you. I have an important meeting today." Jamie smiled. "I wish you luck. I'm sure everything will go well." Elias nodded his thanks, his eyes warm. She turned away, and he opened his laptop, reviewing the presentation one last time. A few customers at the next table glanced at him and whispered, "That's the guy in the lobby yesterday." "Oh, the one who was mistaken for not being a VIP. Yeah. Actually, if you look closely, he does have a lot of charisma." Those words did not reach Elias's ears, but their gazes still made the atmosphere somewhat strange. About 10 minutes later, Clara Hensley walked into the breakfast area. She was checking on the staff, talking into a small walkie-talkie. Her eyes accidentally glanced at Elias and stopped. She recognized him immediately. Her expression was slightly uneasy, as if the sight of the man reminded her of something unpleasant. A waiter passed by, carrying a tray of orange juice. Clara called out softly, "I'll bring that portion to table number 7. That is Elias's table." She walked over, a polite smile on her lips. "Good morning, Mr. Monroe. Hope you enjoyed our service yesterday." Elias looked up, his voice calm. "Everything is fine. Thank you." She put the glass of orange juice on the table and said casually, "Are you in Seattle for tourism or business? I have a meeting with Shaw Capital this morning." Clara raised her eyebrows, looking surprised. "With Richard Shaw." "Yes, I'm the founder of NeuroSpark AI." The answer made her smile falter, but she quickly regained her composure. "Oh, that's interesting. I've heard of that company." As soon as she finished speaking, her hand accidentally hit the glass of orange juice. There was a small clang sound. The entire contents of the glass spilled onto the table, spilling over the documents and laptop keyboard. Elias froze. Papers were soaked. Computer screens flickered and went black. A few customers turned around, startled. Silence fell. Clara turned pale, quickly took a tissue to wipe, and said continuously, "Oh my God, I'm sorry. I'm so clumsy. It was just an accident." Elias said nothing. He looked at the wet pages, the blurred words, then raised his head. His voice was low, very small, but clear. "Do you know what's in this computer?" Clara stopped, her eyes confused. No, it's just orange juice." Elias closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and tried to calm himself. He knew he shouldn't lose his temper in public, but deep inside, a silent pain welled up inside him, not just because of the computer, but because of the way she had looked at him before the accident. Jamie ran over. "Worried, Mr. Monroe. Are you okay?" "It's okay. My laptop is just broken. Oh my God. Let me help you take it to the technical room to dry." Elias nodded and handed her the phone. Clara stood there, tissue in hand, her eyes wavering between embarrassment and annoyance. She tried to smile, but her voice was broken. I'm really sorry, Mr. Monroe. I didn't mean it." Elias looked her straight in the eye. "I know. You definitely didn't mean it. But have you ever wondered why it's only when you're in front of someone like me that you're so accidental?" The voice was not loud, but it echoed throughout the hall. The few guests fell silent, leaving only a faint background music. Clara stiffened, her face red. She tried to say something, but all she managed to say was, "What are you implying?" "Nothing," Elias replied. "It's just that sometimes prejudice doesn't need words. It's in the look, in the way people ask questions, and in seemingly unintentional actions." He stood up, picked up the wet documents, and said calmly, "I'll be in charge of fixing the machine. Thanks for the orange juice this morning." Then he walked away, leaving behind a silent breakfast hall. Jamie watched, her heart heavy. She knew what had happened was more than an accident. It was the first breach between the surface politeness and the hidden prejudices of the human mind. As for Clara, when Elias was out of sight, she stood still for a long time. She held her empty glass, her eyes fixed on the table, as if she could see herself in it dim, distorted, and shapeless, back in his room. Elias opened his suitcase and took out his spare laptop. The screen lit up. Fortunately, a copy of the presentation was still on his online drive. He breathed a sigh of relief, but his eyes were still filled with weariness. He wasn't angry, just sad. He opened a new note and typed slowly, "Dignity lies not in how you are treated, but in how you choose to respond." But is silence always the right thing to do? He looked at the words, then leaned back in his chair. On the table, the silver clock ticked softly. Tick, 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 each beat slow and steady, as if reminding him to be steadfast. Outside the window, Seattle was still shrouded in fog. Little did anyone know that. Just an hour later, when the news of the offended VIP spread through social media, this small story would become the trigger for a chain of events that could not be stopped. The morning passed slowly. Elias sat in his room, quietly wiping down his wet laptop. It wouldn't start. Droplets of water fell from the keyboard, seeping into his inner frustration. Not just because of the work, but because he felt violated. Again, in a space where he should have been respected. He sat back in his chair, his hands clasped together, his eyes half closed. His mother's voice seemed to echo from afar. In his memory, "Son, if the world tries to make you bitter, let your kindness confuse it." Elias opened his eyes. He didn't want to be angry, but his silence seemed to suggest he would endure it forever. He stood up and walked to the window. Below was a busy street, yellow taxis lining up in the opaque rain. He sighed, then pulled out his phone and dialed a familiar number. The secretary's voice rang out on the other end of the line, Neurospark. "I'm Linda. It's me, Elias. Connect me with Denise Lowell, CEO of Helios Hotels." There was a moment of silence. "Yes, I will contact you immediately." Just 5 minutes later, the phone rang. The name Denise Lowell appeared. Elias answered, his voice low but calm. "Denise, hello?" The woman's voice on the other end rang out, quick and decisive. Elias Monroe, I heard you were in Seattle. Right, is our hotel okay with picking you up? Elias smiled slightly, but not happily. Interesting. I think Helios Grand just taught me a lesson in patience. Denise slowed down, realizing something was wrong. What happened? One of your managers just spilled orange juice on my computer right in the middle of a signing. She apologized, but never explained. It's not the orange juice that bothers me. It's the look before and after it happened. There was silence on the other end of the line for a few seconds. Then Denise said, her voice low. The manager's name, Clara Hensley. I know her. She's an ex-system person. I'm sorry. Elias. I'll take care of this right away. Elias paused, his voice soft but firm. I don't need an apology. I just want everyone in your system to understand. Respect is not a privilege. It's the standard. Denise sighed. You always sound more like a teacher than a CEO. Okay, let me give them a lesson they will never forget. The call ended. Elias put the phone down and sighed. He didn't want to retaliate, but he understood there were limits to how long one could remain silent. 20 minutes later, the hotel reception phone rang. Jamie picked up the phone and heard the urgent voice of his superior from headquarters. All Helios Grand management is requested to gather in the lobby within 10 minutes. There is an urgent order from headquarters. Jamie looked around, surprised. Clara was in the restaurant area, looking tired. When she heard the news, she frowned. What orders on Sunday morning? Who gave the orders? From CEO Denise Lowell. Clara stopped short. She had heard that name many times, but she had never thought she would be called out by name from headquarters. 15 minutes later, all the managers, department heads, and VIPs in the lobby were gathered. The atmosphere was tense. A large screen was pulled down in the middle of the lobby, displaying the Helios Hotels logo. Then Denise Lowell's face appeared via video call, stern, cold, and powerful. Hello, everyone. I know you're all wondering what this urgent call is about. Her voice echoed throughout the hall. This morning at Helios Grand Seattle, an unfortunate incident occurred. One of our VIP guests, Elias Monroe, CEO of Neurospark AI, was treated disrespectfully. I want to emphasize there is no excuse for discrimination, whether intentional or unintentional. The atmosphere was heavy. Clara stood behind him, her face pale. Jamie looked over, worried. Denise continued, Helios is not just a luxury hotel chain. We are a brand of people, of values, and if the people who represent us forget that, I will remind them with my actions. All eyes were on Clara. She felt as if the floor were tilting beneath her. Her heart was pounding. I didn't mean to offend him. It was just an accident. Denise's voice still rang out, calm but sharp as a knife. Clara Hensley. I know you have devoted more than 10 years to the system, but no amount of seniority can cover up disrespect. I order your temporary suspension, pending an official investigation. The whole hall was in an uproar. Clara was trembling. Her eyes were wet, and she was speechless. Just then, Elias stepped out of the elevator. He had no idea that an emergency meeting was going on. All eyes immediately turned to him. Denise on the screen realized and smiled slightly. Mr. Monroe, what a coincidence. I was just talking about you. Elias stopped, slightly surprised. I heard something about it, but maybe this isn't necessary. On the contrary, it is essential. I will not let anyone in my organization look down on a guest. Elias was silent for a moment. Then he spoke slowly, his eyes looking at Clara, who was bowing her head, her face pale with fear. "If I can say one thing, I don't want to see anyone lose their job over a glass of orange juice. I want to see real change." Denise was slightly surprised. "Are you sure she embarrassed you?" Elias nodded. "Justice is not punishment, but awakening. If I make one person afraid today, I am doing to the world what it did to me." The hall was silent. Everyone stood still. No one dared to breathe loudly. Clara looked at him, tears falling. I don't know what to say other than thank you." Elias nodded slightly. "Don't thank me. Thank yourself. If from now on you choose to look at others with respect." Denise smiled through the screen, her voice softer. "You are truly special, Elias. Perhaps that is why the world needs to hear from you." Elias replied briefly, "I don't want the world to listen to me. I want it to change." The screen went black. The hall was quiet again, except for the sound of the rain pattering against the windows. People began to disperse. Jamie approached and whispered, "You are different, Mr. Monroe. I have never seen anyone handle things like you." Elias looked out the window, where weak light filtered through the gray clouds, his voice low. "Sometimes kindness is the most painful revenge." That morning, everything in Helios Grand seemed slower than usual, but in the hearts of everyone in the lobby, something had changed. As for Elias, he returned to his room and quietly opened his spare laptop. On the screen, the words he had written the night before were still there. "Dignity is not how you are treated, but how you choose to react." He read it again, then typed another line. "And there are reactions that make the world look back at itself." That afternoon, Seattle was drenched in a light rain. The raindrops fell on the street in a thin layer of mist, blurring the air. From room 801, Elias looked down and saw the crowd on the street rushing to escape the rain. He was still sitting at his desk, silently in front of his laptop. On the screen, his presentation for the meeting with Richard Shaw was complete, but his mind was not there. He saw Clara Hensley's face this morning in his mind, shocked, worried, and a little pitiful. He remembered her bowing her head, her voice shaking as she apologized. Part of him felt satisfied that justice had been served, but another part felt burdened. Elias wondered, would he really win if others only changed out of fear? He smiled sadly and said to himself, "Mom is right. The right path is always the loneliest." Around 6 o'clock in the evening, there was a knock on the door. He opened it and saw Jamie standing there, holding an envelope and a cup of hot ginger tea. "I brought you some tea. It's humid in Seattle and you can catch a cold easily." Elias took it, smiling. "Thank you, Jamie. That's great." "What's up?" Jamie held out the envelope, a handwritten letter from Clara. "She asked me to deliver it. I thought, you should read it." Elias was a little surprised. There was something both old-fashioned and heartfelt about a handwritten letter in the age of email and text messaging. He opened the envelope and found several sheets of paper inside, written in a slanted, slightly shaky handwriting. He began to read. "Mr. Monroe, I know you probably don't want to hear anything more from me, but I can't just leave quietly. Today, when I was called out in front of everyone, I felt humiliated. Not because I lost face, but because for the first time in my life, I saw clearly my own pettiness. I've worked at Helios Grand for almost 15 years. I thought I knew what professionalism was, what fairness was, but seeing him, a young, black, confident, and calm man, standing in a space I'd grown accustomed to thinking belonged to a certain type of person, I was scared, afraid that the world I knew was changing, afraid that my position was no longer privileged, and that fear made me do stupid things, even cruel things, without even realizing it. I didn't mean to spill the orange juice, but I know deep down I wanted him to back off, and that's what's kept me up all day. I'm ashamed of myself. You're right, Mr. Monroe. Prejudice doesn't need words. It's in the way we look at people, in the way we think they don't belong. I was wrong. And if I may, I want you to know that I'm not just sorry I'm learning to see people again. Sincerely, Clara Hensley. Elias put the letter down, his eyes lingering on the last line. Outside, the rain fell steadily, each drop hitting the window like a slow heartbeat. He sat still, his heart in turmoil. It wasn't the apology he'd expected, but it was the truest he'd ever read. A confession not of justification, but of awakening. Jamie stood still by the door and asked softly, "Are you okay?" Elias nodded, handing back the letter. "I'm fine. Thank you. Keep this letter. You should read it, because perhaps it's not just for me, but for all those who live in silence." Jamie took it back, her eyes slightly wet. "You always say things that make people think. Mr. Monroe." He smiled. "No, I just say what the world forgets." That night, when everyone in the hotel had fallen silent, Clara sat alone in her empty office. She had packed up all her belongings, preparing to leave the position she had held for nearly 2 decades. On the table was an old photo her and the staff from the first year Helios Grand opened. She was young and full of enthusiasm. She remembered clearly that she had promised herself that she would treat all customers equally. And now, she was the one who had betrayed that promise. She bowed her head, tears falling on the photo, not because she was suspended, but because she realized she had lost the best part of herself. The door opened slightly. Jamie entered, holding the letter Elias had just returned. "I think you should keep it," Mr. Monroe said. "It deserves to be read by the person who needs it most." Clara looked up, her eyes red. "He really said that?" "Yes, and he also said that justice is not about punishment, but about making people realize what is right." Clara smiled softly. Her voice choked. "He's right. I've lived my whole life believing I'm fair, but in truth, I'm only fair when it's in my best interests." Jamie put his hand on her shoulder. "It's important that you realize. Maybe the world needs people brave enough to admit they're wrong." Clara looked at the young girl, then looked out the window where the rain continued to fall. "I used to think that only young people could change, but perhaps, today, I also need to learn from the beginning." Meanwhile, in room 801, Elias' video called Grace Monroe. The screen showed his mother's gentle face and silver hair. "Son, why do you look so tired? Is everything okay?" "It's okay, Mom. I just got a letter from someone who hurt me, but strangely enough, I feel relieved." Grace smiled, her voice warm. "Because I understand that forgiveness is not weakness, but the strength of someone who does not want to be swallowed by darkness." Elias was silent. His eyes were on the screen, but they seemed to penetrate the distance, penetrate the rain outside. "I think I'll invite her to the conference tomorrow. What are you going to do?" Not to prove who is right and who is wrong, but to show her that when we learn to open our hearts, the world opens up to us. Grace nodded, her eyes filled with pride. Son, you're doing what I have always believed in, turning pain into a lesson for others. Night fell. The clouds parted over Seattle, revealing a few faint stars. Elias sat by the window, writing the last lines in his diary today. I saw a man changed, not by the force of reason, but by the truth. And perhaps justice sometimes lies not in the court, but in the moment a man realizes he was wrong. He put down his pen and smiled slightly. Outside, the rain had stopped, the air was fresh, and somewhere the city seemed more peaceful. The next morning, Seattle's sky was bluer than usual. The first rays of sunlight filtered through a thin layer of clouds and shone on the sparkling waters of Elliott Bay. In room 801, Elias tied his tie and looked in the mirror. On the table, a small card sat neatly. Helios Grand respectfully wishes Mr. Monroe a successful presentation. Below it was Jamie Rivera's handwritten signature, small, slanted, but sympathetic. He smiled. The small change in the way one person treats another is sometimes the first sign of hope. He picked up his briefcase and walked out of the room. Outside, the hallway was quiet, filled with the faint scent of jasmine. When the elevator opened, he didn't expect Clara Hensley to be standing there. She was dressed simply, no longer in her manager uniform, just a long gray coat, her face gentle but tired. The two looked at each other for a few seconds, saying nothing. Then Clara bowed her head slightly. "Thank you for giving me the opportunity to come today." Elias replied in a warm but calm voice, "I just invited you here to see. Sometimes justice is not on the stage, but in the hearts of those who dare to face their mistakes." She nodded slightly, her eyes shining with emotion. "I don't know what to say other than thank you and sorry. Hold on to that. But don't hold on to the guilt. Turn it into motivation." The elevator stopped. The two of them got out and headed towards the conference center. The main conference room of the Helios Grand Hotel was ablaze with lights. Hundreds of people were present. Investors, journalists, tech CEOs, and representatives of global organizations. The logo, Global Tech for Humanity Summit, was illuminated on a large screen behind the stage. In the front row, Richard Shaw sat cross-legged, his eyes cold, looking at his phone. When Elias entered, he only nodded slightly, as if he were evaluating a potential partner. Nothing more, nothing less. Elias slowly walked onto the stage. He did not have the usual nervous look of a speaker. Instead, his eyes were calm, his voice deep. "Hello, everyone. I am Elias Monroe, founder of Neurospark AI, a small company, but with a big belief technology is only truly valuable when it serves people, without distinction." A light applause sounded. Elias continued. His voice was not loud, but each word echoed far and wide. "Yesterday, before I got here, I had a strange morning. A small accident. A glass of orange juice spilled on my computer. But what got me thinking was not the broken computer, but the look that came with it." The whole room fell silent. He looked around at everyone and continued slowly. "We live in an age where technology can read emotions, measure heart rates, even predict behavior. But perhaps what humanity has yet to do is look at each other with compassion." Someone in the audience nodded, and a few murmurs arose. Richard Shaw began to look at him more closely. Elias took a few slow steps, his hand resting lightly on the podium. "Yesterday, I was reminded of something my mother, a black teacher in New Orleans, said, "When the world does not welcome you, greet it with kindness." I have done that for years, but this morning I realized sometimes kindness needs to be defended. He paused for a moment, letting the words sink in. Then he told the story briefly at the hotel. No names, no blame, just a small, honest slice of life, told in a gentle, non-dramatic tone. The woman who spilled the orange juice sent me a letter. In it, she wrote that she wasn't afraid of me. She was afraid of change. And that made me understand that sometimes discrimination doesn't come from malice. It comes from fear of being replaced. The whole room was silent. No one expected such a simple story to come out in the middle of a technology conference, and that's why today I'm not just talking about technology, but about people. NeuroSpark doesn't create machines to replace us. We create technology to help us look at ourselves, to realize that all data is meaningless without humanity. In the front row, Clara Hensley sat silently, her hands clasped in her lap. Tears rolled down her face when she heard the phrase, "the woman who spilled the orange juice." No one knew the story was about her, except Jamie, who was standing in the doorway. Elias ended his speech with a short sentence. "I don't believe in numbers that talk. I believe in people who listen." Applause rang out throughout the room. Not the polite kind, but a long, heartfelt applause, as if everyone saw themselves in the story. Richard Shaw stood up, approached the stage, and held out his hand. "You surprise me. Monroe, I came here to hear about software, but ended up being taught a lesson in humanity." Elias shook his hand, a slight smile on his lips. Perhaps both are needed for the future. As people gradually left the hall, Clara approached. She stood still for a moment, as if waiting for something. Elias saw her and nodded. "Did you hear every word?" Clara replied, her voice trembling slightly. "You spoke for all of us who were afraid of change. I'm just telling the truth. She was a part of that journey, and I believe everyone deserves a chance to write their own story." Clara shed tears, this time not from shame, but from gratitude. "You know, for many years I taught my staff to smile, to be polite, to follow the process, but today I understand. Respect does not come from the process, but from the heart." Elias nodded. Sometimes, just one person dares to look back at himself. The world has changed a little. As he stepped out into the hall, Jamie Rivera ran up. You had the whole room crying. I've never seen such silence at a tech conference. Elias smiled, his eyes looking far away. Maybe because they don't just hear my story, they hear themselves in it. Outside, the clouds began to part. The sunlight glistened on the wet pavement like thousands of tiny glass beads. Elias walked slowly in the wind, his heart light. In the distance, Grace Monroe called. Her voice was full of pride. "I saw your speech. You did it, Elias." He smiled. "I'm just telling you about a normal morning." "Mom, no, you tell the story of how a man chose to stand up with kindness, and that, my son, is what this world needs most." That afternoon, news of Elias Monroe's speech spread across social media platforms. Major newspapers such as the Seattle Times, Forbes, and the Washington Post all carried similar headlines. A black CEO silences a global tech conference with a story of humanity. A video of his talk garnered millions of views in just a few hours. His quote, "Justice is not punishment, it is awakening," became a viral hashtag on Twitter and LinkedIn. Conference attendees shared the moment. Along with touching captions, I cried in the middle of a tech conference, and I'm not ashamed of it. Elias Monroe, who reminded me that success means nothing if we forget kindness. Meanwhile, at a small cafe near downtown Seattle, Jamie Rivera was reviewing the video on her phone. She sat alone, her eyes filling with tears as she saw Elias standing on stage, calm, confident, and kind. A customer sitting at the next table recognized her and said, "Are you an employee at Helios Grand? I saw you on the news video this morning." Jamie was a little shy. "Yes, that's right. I work at the front desk." The guest smiled. "I was there last week. I had no idea that the hotel would be the source of such a story." "Thank you for being so kind to that man." Jamie blushed and bowed his head. "I just did the right thing. He's the one who changed us." That sentence made the guest nod, as if understanding something profound. At Helios Hotel's international headquarters in New York. Denise Lowell watched the media as articles praising Elias's speech flashed on the big screen. She sat silently, twirling a pen in her hand. "One guest has caused our entire hotel system to rethink itself." She told her assistant, "I want Helios Grand Seattle to institute a program called the Kindness Initiative. We will retrain all employees on communication skills and cultural awareness." Assistant asked softly, "Are you going to invite Mr. Monroe to join?" Denise smiled. "Of course, but not as a victim. I want him to be an inspiration across town." Clara Hensley sat in her small apartment, watching the speech on the television. She watched it frame by frame, silently. When Elias got to the story of the woman who spilled the orange juice, she put her hand to her heart, tears streaming down her face. It was no longer shame, but a sense of salvation. She whispered, "He turned my mistake into a lesson for the whole world." She opened her computer and wrote a long email to Elias Monroe. Subject, "I want to start over. I saw the video. I understand why people were moved. You didn't lose my job. You gave me my conscience back. I applied to Helios Kindness Initiative. I want to stand on stage one day, not to talk about shame, but to say that I've changed." She pressed send, then smiled slightly. For the first time in years, she felt genuinely relieved. Elias was sitting in the Shaw Capitol conference room when he received the email. He read it, paused for a moment, then typed a few lines in reply. "Thank you. Clara, do it, and if you need a companion on your new journey, I'll be happy to help." He pressed send, then turned back to the conference table. In front of him was Richard Shaw, who still had a cold expression, but there was something else in his eyes. "Monroe," he said slowly, "I want to invest in NeuroSpark, not just because of the technology, but because of the people behind it." Elias looked at him. Slightly surprised, "I thought you were only interested in profit. I used to be like that. But yesterday, you made me think again. The world has no shortage of smart people, but it lacks kind people." Elias nodded slightly and shook his hand. In that moment, he understood that sometimes the greatest power of a speech lies not in the applause, but in the quiet decisions that follow. A few days later, Helios Grand Seattle returned to normal, but the atmosphere in the hotel was different. The staff smiled more, cared more about each other. At the front desk, Jamie saw more Black, Asian, and Indian tourists than before. A little girl about 8 years old ran back and said to her mother, "Mom, is this where the nice black uncle I saw on TV lives?" The mother smiled. "That's right, honey. He teaches people to respect each other." Jamie watched, her heart warming. She turned to her colleague and whispered, "Monroe not only changed one person, but also changed the atmosphere of this place." Meanwhile, in his office, Elias received a new handwritten letter, this time from Denise Lowell. The handwriting was neat and straight, but the words were full of emotion. "Elias, I want to thank you on behalf of the entire Helios system. Your story has made us look back. Over the past 3 days, thousands of employees have written letters pledging to relearn understanding and respect. And, what is even more amazing, customers have sent letters saying they feel more seen and appreciated than before. A glass of orange juice can be a problem, but in your case, it has sparked a movement." Elias finished reading, leaned back in his chair, his eyes looking far away. On the table was a photo of his mother smiling under the magnolia tree. He spoke softly, as if she were right there, Mom. "I think I finally understand. Kindness is not just to protect yourself, but to move the world." That evening, as he walked along the bay, some strangers recognized him and came to greet him. "You're Elias Monroe." "Right. I just wanted to say that your speech made me rethink how I treat my employees. I shared your video with my daughter. She said, 'I want to be like him when I grow up.'" Elias smiled, thanking each one. He didn't see himself as a hero. He saw himself as part of something bigger, a wave of change that was beginning. The Seattle night sky opened up, reflecting light onto the water. Over the gentle sound of the waves, Elias spoke softly. "Justice is not the end of a story. It is when people find a way to begin again, with kindness." A week after the conference, Seattle returned to normal. It was autumn, and the trees along Pine Street were starting to change color. Elias sat by the window of his New York office, where he had just returned from a busy week. NeuroSpark AI was quickly becoming famous, not just for its technology, but also for the humanistic philosophy behind it. His phone rang constantly, calls from investors, from newspapers, from universities inviting him to speak. He answered politely, but inside, the silence made him miss Seattle, miss the rainy morning, miss Clara's eyes when she said, "I will learn to look at people again." Some part of him still felt unfulfilled. His speech had touched millions, but deep down, he knew real change would only begin when the next generation learned to be kinder. While he was thinking, the secretary knocked on the door. "Sir, there is a letter addressed directly to the company. The return address is a girl named Amelia Carter from Chicago." Elias was a little surprised. He took the envelope and looked at the neat, childish handwriting. The first line was written in purple ink to Uncle Elias Monroe, the one who made me believe that goodness still exists. He opened the letter. "Dear Uncle Elias, I am 10 years old. The other day, I saw a video of you talking online. My mother cried when she heard you say, 'Justice is not about punishment. It is about awakening.' I didn't understand it all, so my mother explained to me that you are a person who doesn't get angry at those who have hurt you. I told this story at school. There was a kid in my class who used to tease me because my skin was darker than the other kids. Today, I looked at him and just said, 'I'm not mad, but I hope you'll reconsider.' And he said, 'Sorry. My mom said you changed the world, but I think you changed one heart at a time. I want to grow up to be like you, not because you're famous, but because you're kind.' Signed, Amelia Carter, P.S. I drew you a picture on the back." Elias turned the paper over. It was a crayon doodle, a black man standing in a cloud, holding a glass of orange juice, surrounded by people laughing and holding hands. In the corner was a small line, "Turn mistakes into kindness." He looked at the painting for a long time. The air in the room seemed to quiet down. No praise from the media had ever touched him as much as this moment. He took out his phone, took a picture of the picture, and sent it to his mother with a short message. "I was just reminded of why I started." That afternoon, Grace Monroe called back. Her voice was warm and a little choked. "Son, I saw the letter. That child understood something that many adults do not. I think, Mom, maybe the best thing a person can leave behind is not their achievements, but how they make others want to be better." That's right. Elias, Mother told you before, true justice is not in the law, but in the heart of the person who listens. His mother's words left Elias silent for a long time. He recalled his childhood years when he and his mother lived in a poor neighborhood, and the neighbors looked down on him because of the color of his skin. Every time he cried, his mother would just hold him and say, "Don't let them make you like them." Now, he understood. His mother had taught him not only how to survive, but also how to heal the world through her own pain. The next morning, Elias returned to Seattle. He arrived at the Helios Grand, not as a VIP, but as a friend. The hotel had changed photos of the staff on the walls and a new slogan: "Kindness is the highest standard." Kindness is the highest standard. Jamie Rivera saw him and shouted, "Monroe, I knew you would come back." He smiled. "I promise." Remember, Jamie led him around the lobby, pointing to a newly decorated alcove. A large framed picture hung in the center. Inside was a handwritten letter from Clara Hensley and a printed copy of Elias's speech at the conference, "Respect is not a privilege. It is a human standard." Below, a small sign reads, "Dedicated to those who dare to change themselves." Elias saw. His heart was clenched with emotion. He asked softly, "Where is Clara?" Jamie replied, "She's in the conference room, talking to the new hires. They call her Coach Clara." Elias approached the conference room door and looked through the glass. Inside, Clara was talking to a group of young employees. Her voice was gentle, her eyes bright and calm. "You know, sometimes the biggest lesson in service is not about the process, but about how you look at people. I made mistakes, but I learned that when you admit your mistakes, you don't get weaker, you get stronger." The room fell silent, then applauded. Clara saw Elias standing outside, smiling slightly, her nod, no longer an apology, but a gratitude. That evening, when he returned to his old room, Elias placed Amelia's letter on the table and looked out the window. Seattle was lit up at night, its lights reflecting off the water, shimmering like 1,000 fragments of memory. He took out his notebook and wrote a few lines. Perhaps, we never know how far our small actions can go. A glass of spilled orange juice on a rainy morning can become the first drop of an ocean of sympathy. He stopped writing, smiled, and whispered, "Thanks for making me believe again. Amelia." The next day, Elias flew to Chicago. He didn't tell anyone, just took a small envelope with him. When he arrived at Lincoln Elementary School, where Amelia attended, he handed the envelope to the school office. Inside was a short note. "Dear Amelia, thank you for teaching me that kindness can go further than any speech. I don't know who you are, but I believe that if there were more people like you, the world would be a more peaceful place. P.S. I am sending you a small gift. a notebook to write down the kind things you see every day, because sometimes those things will become the light for others. The school administrator read the letter and said emotionally, "I will give it to the little girl herself. She will be very happy." Elias bowed his head in thanks, then quietly left. Outside, the first snow of the season began to fall, as light as small prayers in the hurried world. He looked up, smiling slightly, and in that moment, he knew his journey wasn't over. It had only just begun, with a glass of orange juice, an apology, and a child who believed in kindness. 3 months later, winter has settled over the United States. Outside the NeuroSpark AI office window, snowflakes fall slowly, blending with the lights of bustling New York City. Elias sits pensively in front of his monitor, reviewing an email from national television channel NBC Morning Today. "Dear Mr. Monroe, we would like to invite you to participate in our special program, The Ripple Effect, honoring people who create positive ripples in society. We have a special guest who would like to meet you, a young girl named Amelia Carter." Elias frowned slightly, his heart slowing down. Amelia, the girl who sent the letter, touched him to the bottom of his heart. He smiled, his eyes warming. Every wave starts with a single drop. He nodded in agreement. On the day of the recording, the NBC studio was brightly lit. Elias walked in wearing a light gray suit, his face calm but his eyes a little nervous. The room fell silent as the MC introduced, "Ladies and gentlemen, today we meet the man who made the world reflect on the true meaning of justice, CEO Elias Monroe." Applause broke out. Elias bowed in thanks, then sat down. The MC asked him about last year's speech, about how the story at Helios Grand had become a global symbol of kindness. Elias replied softly, "I never thought I was doing anything big. I just told a true story, and perhaps people need true stories to look back at themselves." MC smiled, and that story went viral. But today, we're bringing in someone else, someone who was inspired by you, and in turn, who touched millions of hearts through one small act. Please welcome Amelia Carter. The stage door opened. A girl in a light blue dress walked in, her curly hair tied back, a brown leather notebook in her hand. Elias stood up, his eyes shining. Amelia smiled, bowed, and approached. She handed him the notebook and whispered, "Uncle, this is the notebook you gave me. I have filled it." He opened it. Inside was a childish handwriting, recording each good deed Amelia witnessed each day. Tom helped her take out the trash. Teacher gave a shirt to a homeless person. Grandma told the whole neighborhood about Uncle Elias. Elias chuckled, his voice choked. "You have done what I always dreamed of, making kindness a habit." Amelia replied, her eyes sparkling, "I just followed your lead. You said kindness is the highest standard." The audience below burst into laughter, then applauded enthusiastically. The atmosphere in the studio became strangely warm, as if everyone was pulled closer by an invisible string. MC continued Elias, "Have you ever thought that just one small act, forgiveness, can change the lives of millions of people?" Elias thought for a moment and then replied, "Actually, I don't think forgiveness changes the world. I think it changes people. And when enough people change, the world will never be the same again." The whole room was silent for a few seconds. Then Amelia spoke, innocently but firmly. "I think forgiveness is like turning on a light in the dark. When you do that, other people start turning on their lights too." The applause was thunderous. Elias turned to look at the little girl, deeply moved. He had never expected a child to say such profound things. After the recording, the two were invited to the backstage area. Elias poured Amelia some water, and she eagerly asked all sorts of questions. "Uncle Elias, do you still work at that hotel, no?" "I was only there for a few days. Dear, what about the manager? Has she apologized yet?" Elias smiled gently. "Yes, and now she teaches others how to be kind. Sometimes the people who have made mistakes are the most inspiring." Amelia nodded. "I want to be like that too. When I grow up, I want to be a teacher, teaching children how to understand each other better." Elias gently placed his hand on her shoulder. "If so, I will change the world faster than you." The uncle and nephew laughed together. Outside, the MC and the camera crew looked over, everyone smiling with emotion. That night, the show aired across America. The scene of Elias and Amelia talking, laughter mixed with tears, stopped millions in their tracks on social media. The hashtag Ripple of Kindness trended worldwide. People told the story as proof that kindness really is contagious, from a once-ignored man to an unknown little girl. A comment shared hundreds of thousands of times: "The world doesn't need more heroes. We just need one more person like Elias Monroe and one more child like Amelia Carter to remind us that goodness still exists." A few days later, Elias received a call from Denise Lowell. Her voice rang out through the phone, tinged with emotion. "Elias, I saw the show. I think Helios should start a new campaign, the Ripple Project. We want to invite little Amelia and you to be our two faces, a symbol for two generations to rewrite the definition of kindness." He was a little surprised, then nodded even though she couldn't see "I agree." "But only if this campaign is not just a slogan, but really touches every heart." Denise replied, "I believe you. You have proven that the smallest thing can spread like waves." The following week, Elias flew to Seattle again. He, Clara, Jamie, and representatives from Helios held a press conference to announce the Ripple Project, a program that teaches empathy skills to hotel staff across the United States. On stage, he briefly recounted his journey while Clara stood by, her eyes red. "If it weren't for my mistakes, none of this would have happened," she said. "But through Elias, I learned that every mistake can be a seed for something good." The whole audience stood up and applauded. Elias gently took her hand, his eyes sparkling. "We are all learning. Clara, as long as we keep learning, there is hope for the world." When the meeting ended, Elias stepped outside. Snow was still falling lightly. He saw Amelia running towards him, waving, her cheeks flushed. "Uncle, I see a lot of people smiling today. I think you've done it." Elias bent down, looked at the little girl, and smiled gently. "It's not you, Amelia. It's us. Two generations, both believing that kindness never goes out of style." She held his hand tightly. In the white of the Seattle winter, two people, a grown man, a child, stood side by side as a symbol of something simple yet profound. Justice does not come from power. It begins in the heart. 2 years after that fateful television encounter, America had changed more than anyone could have imagined. The Ripple Project, initiated by Elias Monroe and the Helios system, had spread across 40 states. Thousands of businesses had joined, implementing training programs on empathy and respect in the workplace. On an early spring morning, soft sunlight streamed down onto the grounds of the Monroe Foundation Community Center. a non-profit founded by Elias, where children and adults learn about empathy, gratitude, and the ability to dialogue across differences. The central gate is engraved with the words, "Kindness doesn't end with words. It begins with understanding." Kindness doesn't end with words. It begins with understanding. Elias walked out of his office, holding a handwritten card from Amelia Carter. She was now 12 years old, a good student, and still wrote him a letter every month. This time it read, "Uncle Elias, I just wrote an essay about you. My teacher said it was the most honest piece she had ever read. I still remember what you said, 'Don't let pain silence you. Turn it into light.' I want to stand on stage like you one day to tell my story." Elias finished reading and smiled. He still had Amelia's first drawing in a small wooden frame on his desk, a glass of orange juice and clasped hands. It was now the symbol of the entire project. There was a soft knock on the door. Clara Hensley entered, her hair grayer but her face bright and peaceful. "You look nostalgic today," she said, her voice as light as a spring breeze. Elias raised his head and smiled. "I was reading Amelia's letter. She reminded me of myself as a child, believing in the good in the world." Clara sat down opposite, her hands clasped together. "If anyone ever asks me what made me change, I would say it was the look in your eyes that day. No resentment, just serenity. It made me look back at myself." Elias looked at her, his eyes full of admiration. "Clara, you have not only changed yourself, but also the industry. I see the press calling you the empathy coach." She laughed gently. "That title does not belong to me. It belongs to all those who dare to learn how to be human again." That afternoon, Jamie Rivera came to see Elias, bringing new Helios documents. Mr. Monroe. Mrs. Denise Lowell sends her congratulations. Helios is officially launching the course, Leadership Through Compassion. She would like to invite you to be an honorary advisor. Elias looked at the young girl, the former shy receptionist who had now become the head of human resources at Helios Grand. He nodded. "Jamie, you remind me that all real change begins with those who dare to stand on the front lines, where man meets man." Jamie replied, his eyes sparkling. "Not everyone has the patience to see the good in others, Elias, but you did, and thanks to that, we also learned to look at ourselves." In the afternoon, Elias went out to walk around the central campus. The cherry trees were just beginning to bloom. The wind carried a sweet scent. Children were running around the yard. A group of elderly people were reading books. All of it reminded him of what his mother had said years ago. Justice only truly exists when people know how to live for each other. He smiled slightly, then stopped in front of the bronze plaque engraved with the names of the founders. The first line, Grace Monroe, the seed of compassion. Inscribed below her name was the familiar saying, "When the world turns its back on you, choose to greet it with kindness." Elias touched the words, his eyes stinging. His mother had died last year, peacefully in her sleep, but her legacy was more than flesh and blood. It was a spirit of kindness. He said softly, "Mom, you see, I kept my promise." That evening, Elias was invited to the Kindness Awards, an annual ceremony honoring those who spread kindness. The auditorium was packed. The lights were bright. When the MC read out the winner of the Lifetime Influence category, the entire audience stood up and applauded. The award goes to Elias Monroe, who turned a moment of wrongdoing into a global movement. Elias stepped onto the stage and accepted the teardrop-shaped crystal statue. He looked out into the audience. Clara, Jamie, Denise, and even Amelia Carter, now a 12-year-old teenager, waving and smiling brightly. He held the microphone, his voice low and full of emotion. "Thank you all. I used to think justice was about victory, but now I understand. It is about compassion. 2 years ago, a small incident hurt me, but that moment taught me that people are only truly great when they know how to forgive." He paused, letting the whole room fall silent. "I want to dedicate this award to all those who have made mistakes and still dare to get up and be better than yesterday. And to little Amelia, who reminds me that kindness has no age." The applause continued. The spotlight fell on his face, not proud, but peaceful. After the ceremony, Amelia ran up and hugged him tightly. "Uncle Elias, can I keep that drop of water for a little while?" Elias placed the crystal figurine in her hands. Light reflected off the crystal, radiating like a small rainbow. He said softly, "You know, every act of kindness is a drop of water. When enough drops are added together, we have an ocean." The girl nodded, her eyes sparkling. "I promise to continue to light the lamp like you." He smiled. "Not like me. Amelia, you light your own light, and that's what makes the world beautiful." Late at night, Elias returned to his hotel room. He opened the window and looked down at the city, sparkling with lights. The night breeze blew gently, carrying with it the sounds of life cars, laughter, and somewhere the echo of street music. He sat down at the table, opened the old diary, and wrote the last line from a spilled glass of orange juice. "I learned that prejudice may divide, but kindness always connects. Justice is not about winning or losing. It is about understanding and forgiveness. If one person can make the world a better place, then perhaps each of us can start with a small act today." He put down his pen, closed his eyes, and let out a soft sigh. Outside, the sky was full of stars, and somewhere, perhaps, the world had just become a little warmer, just because one person chose to respond to injustice with kindness. This story reminds us that dignity is not something others give us, it's something we carry within, even when the world tries to take it away. Elias Monroe chose not to answer humiliation with anger. Instead, he turned pain into purpose, and through that, he healed not only himself, but also the people who wronged him. In life, we all face moments of misunderstanding or bias, especially as we grow older and the world changes around us. But perhaps true strength isn't found in proving others wrong, it's found in showing them a better way. Forgiveness, compassion, and quiet courage can change more hearts than any argument ever could. Let this story remind us kindness is timeless. Empathy has no age, and every small act of grace can ripple further than we imagine. Thank you so much for watching and sharing this journey with us. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more real, healing stories that remind the world compassion is still alive. See you in the next story where every heart deserves to be heard.